Hey there, my name's Jordan, and I'm a financial coach and financial planner. And today I'm your host at the Reimagine Wealth podcast, where we share imperfect stories about embodying our values, weaving just system level safety nets, and working to build the world that we want to live in, one where we all get to have our needs met and thrive. Let these be shared learnings that allow you to more deeply explore, experiment, and shift, and that allow us to unlock our collective knowledge. This show is ad-free and available to everyone, and it wouldn't be possible without your love and support. So if you like what you're listening to, please like, review, subscribe, and share the show with those in your community. If you're able, please support my work to produce the show by becoming a paid member of my Substack, which starts at $6 a month. Link to that and more is in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening. And now let's get into the show. In this episode, you are going to hear directly from Grassroots International, in particular, two individuals, Chung-Wha, who is the co-executive director at Grassroots International, and Saulo Araujo, who is the Director of Global Philanthropy at Grassroots International. Grassroots International is a global grantmaking and movement support organization. They accompany, fund, and work in solidarity with movements, predominantly in the Global South and the U.S., that are on the front lines of change. Grassroots International believes that social, economic, and ecological justice can only be achieved through deep transformation of systems, structures, and culture. Social movements, made up of people organized collectively, with leadership from impacted communities, are the driving force behind this transformation. And you'll get to hear us talk a little bit more about that. And with that, let's go ahead and get into the show. All right, we have two very special guests on the show today. We have Chung-Wha, the co-executive director at Grassroots International, and Saulo Araujo, who is the director of Global Philanthropy. They're going to talk to us more about all of the amazing work that they're doing and the concept of solidarity philanthropy. So Saulo and Chung-Wha, generally for guests on the show, I ask them to share their money story, but I'm going to ask you both to introduce yourself in your own words and share a little bit more about Grassroots International's mission and vision, the work that you all are doing, and how did you both come into this work? How did you get here? And maybe we could start with Saulo and then go to Chung-Wha.
Sure. Jordan, thank you so much for inviting us into our podcast. We are super excited to have this conversation today. So I'm Saulo Araujo. I'm the Director of Global Philanthropy at Grassroots International. My relationship with Grassroots International started in 2005. I was a program associate, a part-time program associate at that time, fresh from a graduate program in international development. And Grassroots International became my political home, my real school. That's where I learned a lot about philanthropy. And I have been in this relationship ever since. In this 20 years of relationship, I worked for a different organization called Why Hunger in New York City. But my relationship with social movements, everything started with Grassroots International. I'm an agronomist by training. I have been working with peasants and indigenous people since 1996. Also out of college, I started working in Brazil, where I come from, and also worked here in the US with urban and farmers and indigenous people. That's my story of how I get here and how I'm involved in this work of resource mobilization.
That's great. And I'm Chung-Wha, also happy to be in this conversation. So I immigrated from Korea in the 70s and grew up here in the US. My parents are very political, and my father was a political prisoner in South Korea for working on democracy, reunification issues. I got politicized working on campaign around U.S. nukes and military out of Korea. So really saw the impact of the U.S. on other countries around the world, especially with sending its military there and propping up dictatorships. So Saulo and I actually have a bunch of colleagues who fled military dictatorships in their home countries and now working here, connecting back to movements in those countries and, promoting transnational solidarity in that way as well. So I was influenced by that work. I also worked on immigrant rights issues in the US. I grew up in public housing. I really started out with a lot of, I have this like love and hate relationship with money. So, had a lot of rage against people with a lot of money. Then as I got involved in this work, just started to see how money could be a tool in service of movements. And at Grassroots International, I think we are one of those organizations trying to work on that, and we can talk more about that. But just happy to be doing this movement support work at Grassroots. Like Saulo said, I also see it as an important political home to build community and build international solidarity philanthropy.
Thank you both so much for sharing a little teaser of what we'll get into and for sharing more about yourselves too. And I also want to really, before we get into the larger concept around solidarity, philanthropy, I also wanted to take a moment to acknowledge just all of the work that you all are doing at Grassroots International across the globe, especially in particular what's happening in Palestine right now. We're seeing a lot of active mobilization. And, there's that saying of from Palestine to Mexico, all borders have got to go. And I'm just wondering if there's anything that you, whether related to Palestine or internationalism more broadly, just anything that either of you want to share about what you're seeing in the landscape across your work that you want listeners to know about or hear about before we dig in.
Yeah, I mean, Palestine is, for us organizationally, we have been supporting grassroots groups in Palestine since our beginning for 40 years. So we have some long-term relationships with groups working with farmers, with women, with youth. And the genocide that's happening right now, it is just so heart-wrenching. And it's at a point when inequality gets so extreme, it determines like the difference between life and death, right? Like that's kind of where we are. We continue to talk to donors in the US to really get activated around it. It's a challenging issue, so there's a lot of political education that we need to do in our communities and philanthropy. We're trying to say, you don't have to know everything about it. Just, let's engage. Let's see if we can support basic human rights, the people's, struggle to survive right now. We currently have a campaign to stop the starvation in Gaza. And we couple that with supporting partners in Palestine as well as groups in the US. Because with Palestine, our starting point is complicity because we live in the US. And I think as funders and as people living in the US, we can either be in complicity or in solidarity. And we're trying to create different entry points of engagement. How do we find an authentic way of being in solidarity with the people of Palestine during this time of genocide? And see that as a path to our liberation as well. What is my solidarity story at this moment, right? That's the question that everyone is going to have a different answer to. But we invite donors to work and learn and engage with us on that.
Yeah, thank you. And that concept of complicity versus solidarity really ties into solidarity philanthropy. And I think to really understand, or at least for folks who are kind of just entering this world, like I think the dissonance that can come with feeling being complicit in this, and also feeling powerless over the systemic forces that are shaping our lives and what's happening in Gaza, what's happening in Sudan, what's happening across the world. it's helpful to at least kind of understand the way that it's currently working within philanthropy. So, Saulo, maybe if you could share more about what's the current landscape of philanthropy looking like, and where are you noticing philanthropy being complicit, and how does money really shape the extraction and just the continued systemic forces that we're living in today? And then I would love to hear more about what solidarity philanthropy can look like.
Sure. So in our analysis, our critical analysis of philanthropy, because we see philanthropy as a space of contestation. It's not an actor. It's not something that lives itself. It's we are inside of philanthropy. So we human beings and people who are committed to social movements, we see as a space of contestation. And that's the space where we actually build our relationships. So our current analysis of philanthropy is that philanthropy is in a contraction. That means that funders, instead of really actually play the role they're supposed to play, which is remove resources, is still holding resources in their own accounts. That action of holding resources is delaying processes that we need to address worldwide. It's not only about foundation in Gaza, but also women's rights, political and civil rights, human rights, that people actually are being threatened by authoritarian regimes. So that's a space that we are in. Philanthropy is in contraction. The second aspect that we see is that many people in philanthropy are trying to navigate threats by authoritarian regimes, not only here in the US, but in Europe and other places. So there is a lack of clarity among ourselves, especially progressives, of how we can move in this political terrain. And the third aspect that defines this moment in philanthropy is the issue of Palestine. Because it's not only about the starvation in Gaza, we actually are being tested, especially progressives, to understand the historical and the global impact that the Palestine issues are holding us. If you don't have clarity on the issue of Palestine, it will be hard to have clarity on other issues. So that's how it defines philanthropy right now. And your second question, Jordan, around how this idea of solidarity philanthropy fits in this political moment. Solidarity philanthropy is a result of what we have accumulated as Grassroots International over 40 years in relationship with social movements. What we are proposing here is a contribution to the existing models that we have developed in frameworks in philanthropy. We are not wants to replace frameworks or say that this framework is the way to go, but is a complement and ideas to answer some questions that the existing frameworks have not been able to answer. One of them is internationalism. That is this idea of this false dichotomy of supporting locally or supporting global. This should not exist. We can still supporting things in the US, but it still hold a perspective of an internationalist perspective. Second, we need to reclaim the idea of solidarity. Solidarity as a concept that had been hijacked as a way of charity or as a way of us to be present for somebody else, the ordering of people in philanthropy or in society. Solidarity for us is a verb that is something that we do in action. We actually enter in relationship with someone, or through giving, or through sharing and building together. And the third point on solidarity philanthropy is praxis. the idea of learning, of doing things together, learning from reflecting what we are doing it again. So solidarity philanthropy is something in movement. So based on these three aspects, Jordan, that's how we can create clarity among ourselves in philanthropy, inspire ourselves to beyond the threats and the moment that we are facing right now, and actually build for the future how we are going to actually have enough power and wisdom to unlock resources that is being held in philanthropy by fear or by any other feeling or ideas that is unproductive at this time, in any time.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm excited to go a little bit deeper into what that looks like. And there's a solidarity philanthropy brief that Grassroots International wrote that came out in 2024. And there's a quote from it that really resonated with me. And I'm hoping you each can share a little bit more around what you've seen that look like, how that actually plays out. But the quote is that it states that solidarity philanthropy takes the critical view that our collective liberation is bound up with one another, and that neither donors nor social movements alone can overcome the contradictions and the challenges of our current moment of acute, overlapping crises. And so I'm wondering, can each of you expand a little bit more? And Saulo, you were already touching on it a little bit, but can you share a little bit more around what you mean by that and what that can actually look like, or what you have been seeing on the ground?
Yeah, I mean, we could talk about this for hours. I think what we're trying to convey here is that solidarity is not some passive act of like endorsing or just supporting, or in the case of donors, just giving a donation. We are really inviting people for a deeper transformation of donors in their engagement. So what that means is building a joint struggle, basically, towards aligned vision. That means we as donors also have to struggle here, in addition to redistribution, in addition to moving money, just really thinking about how can we be, depending on the situation, like how can we be witnessing what is happening? How can we accompany movements and what they're going through? How can we organize other donors to be in long-term relationships with movements, so that it's not just, one-time donation or even 3-year donation? Because we're going to have to support the building of a global movement powerful enough to counter this rising authoritarianism that Saulo talked about, because currently 70% of the world lives under some sort of autocratic rule. And in each of those places, there are social movements working to resist that and constructing alternative communities and working for systems change. And so I think, one aspect that really is different from traditional philanthropy is you're not outside. So you're not outside of what's happening and you're just giving money. But really, we want you to bring your whole self into this and define how you are forming this lifelong relationship. And like Saulo said, and engage in the praxis of action, reflection, and being in accountable long-term relationships with movements.
Yeah. It reminds me of a lot of time when I talk to folks in these spaces, sharing that it really is a gift to also get to engage and really beyond a financial donation, but it's a gift that takes you through the process of unlearning, of personal transformation, and engaging in something that can create meaning and fulfillment for your life, as well as relationships that are reciprocal. So just is reminding me a lot of that. Saulo, anything that you wanted to add to that?
Sure. So I added a little piece because I think we probably have more clarity in terms of the three concepts that I shared, Jordan. Internationalism is, for us, is a matter of understanding where the resources, our wealth came from. Our wealth held in philanthropy in the US didn't come from only from the US communities. It came from somewhere. So being in an internationalist perspective to address that inequality, that extraction of resources that are happening in the past. So we as a progressives, being an internationalist, it doesn't mean only working globally. It means us to understand that we cannot win only inside of the US. We have to win globally. We have to build enough infrastructure for us to win the issues and address the issues that we care at home. Climate justice, women's rights, racial justice. We have to win globally. So that's where our internationalist perspective came from. The solidarity aspect we have built on our practice with social movements by working with social movements. Our idea of solidarity is that it's not only to support social movements, but being in community, in relationship with social movements. And the idea of praxis, which is a new concept for many people, praxis for social movements mean doing things together, mean learning and improving and building together. So that's an idea of movement and being collectives and being communities. Is really go against this idea of individualism or personifying everything that we do. So the idea of praxis is about that. It's about movement and collective.
Yeah, because basically philanthropy comes from the history of colonization, right? Both here in the US and internationally. So simply put, the wealth comes from stolen land and stolen labor. And stolen land includes extraction from everywhere. And just because we pass an environmental law in the US, what happens then? They dump toxic waste in Haiti. I mean, that is literally what is happening. Let's say we raise the minimum wage in the US. What happens? They go to Mexico and get people to work for $1 an hour or a few cents an hour. So we're getting to a point where we can no longer contain the inequalities that our current systems have set up. So we have to just break those silos, and our internationalism is people's internationalism. So social movements are already building transnational movements to change the food system, like global food sovereignty movement, and proposing that as a climate justice solution, saying small farmers cool the planet, right? I mean, that kind of says it all. You're not only growing food, but you're putting carbon back in the soil and you're taking care of the earth. So I think the work that we're doing now is also deeply ecological and inspired by indigenous cosmovision like Buen Vivir, saying, look, capitalism has really distorted the relationships of people among one another and people's relationship to the land. So as the saying goes, a colonizer says, the land belongs to me, but an indigenous person says, I belong to the land. And it's time that we all realize we all belong to the land, to the earth, which there is only one of. And as we write our relationship with the earth that was based on extraction, we need to also write our relationship with each other, which is now in the philanthropy sector, it's divided into like philanthrocapitalists to, kind of liberal philanthropists to progressive philanthropists. And as progressives in philanthropy, how do we deal with these, like the cooptation of liberal philanthropy or the aggressive, kind of predatory philanthrocapitalists that we're seeing, especially in the tech arena? It's just gotten pretty bad.
Yes, I used to work in tech. Listeners know a little bit more about my story, but so much of what you're saying reminds me, one of the places I worked was a renewable energy company that was like a tech software solution that utilities would purchase. And at the same time confronting, oh, we're getting lithium batteries that are coming from these mines in Chile and in other parts where there's the global majority, or what some people refer to as the global south. And all of that extraction is happening in our supply chain, so that we can't just pretend that this like green solution is the solution that creates a more just world. So thank you, Chung-Wha, for drawing those lines together and making it even more and more clear, like the interconnectedness of all of us. I would love to hear more, and Saulo, you touched on this too, the praxis of something that goes far beyond a formal educational setting, but actually engaging in the actual practice of learning together in community. And I got to witness, I think, the outcome of a praxis group that Grassroots International ran that took people and placed them in community to learn together. And so I'm just wondering if either of you could share more about what does praxis look like, or how would you hope to see this praxis happening through the lens of solidarity philanthropy?
Dr. Pedagogy and Praxis at Grassroots.
Oh, yes. So we are big fans of Paulo Freire, Brazilian sociologist that wrote extensively around the pedagogy of the oppressed, the pedagogy of hope. But what's pedagogy? This is a term that we don't use that often, and also linked to education, formal education. But pedagogy is how we learn, and what are the instruments and the tools that provide that opportunity to learn. We learn by doing things. That's the first thing, right? A child to get to the parents, they learn how to move themselves by walking. So that child has to fall a couple times to learn how to walk. We ourselves, we're going to liberate ourselves by learning together. And we cannot, nobody can teach us how to get to collective liberation by ourselves. We have to do it together. So solidarity philanthropy is the pathway for us to transform ourselves as individuals, but then be clear of how we are going to transform philanthropy itself. Solidarity philanthropy, we are not trying to reform philanthropy. We are trying to contest philanthropy as a space and create the conditions from inside, from ourselves, our humanity, based on our humanity, how we are going to transform that sector into a movement support sector. Some people say that we have to compost philanthropy, and it makes sense. But even to compost something, we are going to have the tools and the pathway to do so. So solidarity philanthropy, our idea is not to stay in the sound bites. We actually are extremely committed in it to really create the tools and the pathway of how to get there. So we are not coming with solutions. We are coming with praxis. We are coming with the tool that are learning by doing things together. And we have been doing this for 40 years of social movements. And only with social movements, with the collective work, and understand how they work, is that we are going to create enough power to transform ourselves, each one of us, but also collectively, how we are going to create the conditions to achieve climate justice, to racial justice. So our proposal with Solidarity Philanthropy is based on that. Is how we are going to close this gap, Jordan, between people in philanthropy and social movements. So the first aspect of that for us of Solidarity Philanthropy is how we are going to create the alignment with social movements collectively. And we are proposing building that alignment through context analysis, which is a method, an analytical methodology developed by social movement. We want to build alignment by actually commit ourselves for long-term accompaniment. So if you are a donor and if you don't have the time to accompany social movements, we need to work with organizations who have those relationships for us to continue building alignment. And if you still, all of us, right? Some of us are lawyers, some of us are a janitor, some of us are parents, right? Those things that continue to exist, and then we can continue being in solidarity with social movements by building that alignment. So that's the first point that we have to do, is to build that alignment. The second point is for us to understand our position in this relationship. Each one of us have a specific role to play. Social movements are in the front line. They don't have other role to do. They have to address by themselves the issues that they are facing. For us in philanthropy, we are not a social movement, but we have had a play equally important role to actually context philanthropy from a system of oppression into a system of liberation, for collective liberation. So philanthropy has to play that role. That's why Chung-Wha has articulated so well in many occasions that solidarity philanthropy is the best way for us to transform philanthropy into a movement support sector. And finally, that Chung-Wha has more to say, is that we want to, those three issues that I raised before, internationalism, solidarity, praxis, really to be part of our day-to-day work in philanthropy. We're going to need those tools, Jordan, to really achieve what we want. Or climate justice, or agroecology, whatever we think that's important for us. We're going to need those tools to get there.
Mm.
And one of the areas of alignment that I also want to stress is we want to be aligned on our theory of change, of how social change happens, because I think a lot of funders look for solutions elsewhere, technical answers, research, policy. But solidarity philanthropy is deeply rooted in the belief that deep systemic social change will come from frontline communities organizing themselves into powerful social movements and develop their own vision, their own strategies, their power. And that's something that we are aligned with, as opposed to, oh, let's just provide a seat at the table because social movements are one of many stakeholders. No, frontline communities who bear the brunt of all the systems right now have a special leadership role to play. And I think a lot of funders sometimes have their own strategy, and then they look for grantees. They curate a set of grantees to achieve their strategy. We are flipping that and say we actually trust the movements to come up with their own strategies. So I think defining our relationship as donors, our relationship with movements, is an important point of departure, important alignment we need to get right. And that's how we can develop our role that Saulo is talking about in a way that is appropriate for us. And we don't just mean, because sometimes donors say, well, movements do the work. We just give the money and just get out of the way. That's not what we're saying, right? So that's another way. We want donors to find their full agency in how to move money, how to change philanthropy, and all the stuff that we talked about.
Yes. And what I'm really hearing from so much of this conversation is like deeper coordination between donors and social movements, and Grassroots International being an intermediary of that, but also the redistribution of power from like donors thinking that they have the solution, or philanthropy coming up with what the solution should be, and then just finding almost we're the bosses that have the ideas, or like the leaders, and then go finding the people that will do the work, but moving from that lens of trusting the movement, like you said, Chung-Wha. to thank you both so much. Those are such critical messages that I think need to continually be reinforced. And I really appreciated, Saulo, what you mentioned around how Grassroots International is actively practicing solidarity philanthropy. So thank you. I think we only have time for one last question. And then at the end, I'll see if there's anything else that either of you want to add. But I would love to get your thoughts on this recurring question that I keep hearing in different philanthropic spaces, which is kind of this fear around, well, what if traditional philanthropy goes away? Like, what if we fully spend down our foundations or our DAFs or some other philanthropic vehicle? Once that's gone, won't we just be conceding our power to fascism, to authoritarianism? And I have my own beliefs and thoughts on that. I'm curious how you both orient to it as well. But I think it really speaks to the need to start pairing different strategies together, like what you both are lifting up within the concept of solidarity philanthropy, and move in deeper coordination to build the new and resist the bad at the same time. So I'm curious, what do you both think about, or how do you orient to that question or that contradiction that comes up as we all are working to transform philanthropy? And maybe, well, yeah, I'll let either of you decide. Anyone feeling called to answer first?
Yeah, we both have things to say about that. I mean, it is a contradiction, and I'm gonna say there's not a simple answer, but I think what it shouldn't be is sometimes people see spend down as like, all right, spend down. It ends up becoming spend down equals disappearance. Like you spend down and you just, yeah, I did all I could and you disappear from the scene, right? So I think we have to remind people you are not your money, right? For some people, that may be a good thing to do, to spend down as long as they come out with a donor organizing strategy that allows them to continue to move money. Because I think our value is our capacity to move money. It doesn't just have to be from your redistribution, right? So that's your own redistribution is the beginning, it's not the end. So I think collectively contributing to the moving money and to building a powerful base of progressive donors and progressive money movers is our purpose. And that may include spending down, but that should not give you the permission to disappear. I know Saulo also has some thoughts.
It's hard to replace Chung-Wha as they're so well articulated. I think you said it all, Chung-Wha. There is this idea of people with wealth, whether the social identity is all about the wealth. I think that's a waste of our humanity. I think we are more than our money. There are relationships that you can bring into that we cannot have access to. Social movements, much less. There are ways that we can continue learning and contributing in our small or big ways, with clarity, with solidarity, with love for humanity. So that's the thing that we can do. So I think Chung-Wha said it all.
And we have examples too, like the Chorus Foundation. They spent down, and Farhad is continuing to do donor organizing at another political home at Solidaire. Or there are organizers at Resource Generation who are doing that. Swift Foundation, instead of just spending regular grants, they're supporting a longer lasting indigenous intermediary infrastructure that will last beyond their spend down. People are moving money to community owned different kinds of infrastructure assets that Jordan, you're familiar with, Seed Commons and places like that. So I think it's really about are we contributing to the building of the movement support infrastructure to get stronger and stronger, I think is kind of the collective outcome that we need to pay attention to.
Just holding so much gratitude for you both and those words and everything that you've shared so far, and all of the work that I don't see on a day-to-day basis, but I know is held with so much intentionality and stewardship. I know we are about to be out of time, so I just want to share so much gratitude. Thank you both for coming on the show, trusting me with sharing more about solidarity philanthropy. And as we wrap up, just would love to hear any final words or thoughts that you would love to share with listeners or would hope that they know about before we hop off.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to say that there are so many amazing movements who are doing this work right now with so much impact, with so much courage, whether it's indigenous organizations, winning their sovereignty and land back, or feminist organizations who are like integrating the work of their bodily autonomy with territorial sovereignty, food sovereignty movements that are organizing hundreds of millions of small farmers for livelihoods and climate justice. Just all kinds of work happening all over the world. And we have the privilege of choosing to support that work and finding our own liberation and solidarity inside that story, inside that relationship, or we could just, be a bystander. And it's been a real privilege. And there are movements that we can connect to right now.
Any final words?
Thank you, Jordan. No, it has been an honor to be here in your show, in your podcast. Thank you so much for the invitation. We hope to continue being dialogue with you and bring other people to speak about the solidarity stories with you. I think would be a greatly appreciated. So thank you.
Yes, I would love that. And thank you both so much. Thank you so much for listening to the Reimagine Wealth podcast. You can find resources and links from today's episode in the show notes. And if you enjoyed this episode, please like, review, subscribe, and share this with those in your community. If you'd like to support the show, you can become a paid member of my Substack, which allows me to sustain this work and have more episodes to share in the future. Again, links to all of that and more are in the show notes. And until next time, I'm sending you resilience and warmth. And thank you so much for tuning in.